She doesn't fit this stereotype. She's like a cool grandma. She doesn't have gray hair. She doesn't give out hard candy. She's like a super rich celebrity. This is just a quick video about one of the most commonly used and powerful philosophical tools, the counterexample. A counterexample is an example that is given to prove a general claim. Typically, in my philosophy courses, it's a philosophical theory. It's to prove a general claim false. So we're going to need an example of a general claim. Grandmotherhood is having gray hair and giving out hard candy. It's a little weird to talk about grandmotherhood. I just mean the general characteristic of being a grandmother. And so this is a general claim about what it is to be a grandmother. And it says, what it is to be a grandmother is to have gray hair and to give out hard candy. You know, like my grandmothers, both of them, they would have like some little sucking candies in their purse or sometimes in their sleeves. And if they ran into a child, they would say, hold on a minute, I have a candy for you. And they would give them the candy. Okay, so this is a general claim. Is it true? No, it's not true. That's not what it is to be a grandmother. That's just some typical stuff about grandmothers. And we can prove that this general claim about grandmotherhood is false. And what we need is a single example, just one, that goes counter or against this general claim. So here's a counterexample to this claim. Whoopi Goldberg is the counterexample. Whoopi is like an actress, and she's in her 60s now, and she has grandchildren, right? But she doesn't fit this stereotype. She's like a cool grandma. She doesn't have gray hair. She doesn't give out hard candy. She's like a super rich celebrity. Okay, we did it. That's all it took. One example, one instance. Whoopi Goldberg. Is she even still famous? I don't know if my audience, college students or anyone, are going to know who Whoopi Goldberg is. But anyway, she was a famous actress. She was in like Sister Act. That was a great movie, Sister Act. Anyway, all we needed to do to disprove this general claim was give a single instance, a single example of someone who had this characteristic. She was a grandmother, right? She was an instance of grandmotherhood, but she doesn't have these other things, the gray hair or the giving out of hard candy. Okay, so you can see how this technique, the technique of coming up with counterexamples, will be a valuable tool in assessing philosophical theories, because philosophical theories just are general claims. Here are two quick examples. Knowledge is justified true belief. This is a theory in the philosophical subfield called epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It's a claim about what knowledge is. Knowledge is justified true belief. There's three things. You've got to have something that's a belief, it's got to be a true belief, and it's got to be justified. And then, if you wanted to prove this theory false, and in the 1960s, I think the early 1960s, Ed Gettier proved this false by giving a counterexample. He actually gave two counterexamples in a famous super short paper that he wrote, and there were lots of papers written after that. Anyway, the point is, a philosophical theory is a general claim. All you would need to do to disprove this claim is you find either an example of knowledge that's not justified true belief, or you find an example of a justified true belief that's not knowledge. Ed Gettier's examples are of the second type. They were examples of justified true beliefs that didn't count or shouldn't count or didn't intuitively count to us as instances of knowledge. And then here's an example of a philosophical claim or a potential philosophical theory from, normative philosophy, a claim about what justice is. Justice is strict equality. When I'm using the phrase strict equality here, I mean you give the same stuff to everybody. Everybody gets all the same resources, let's say, right? If you wanted to give a counterexample to a claim like this, you'd find some behavior that was just, but that wasn't strictly equal. Like maybe, for example, you could concoct a scenario where you had, some resource, money or food or something, and you needed to give more of it to one person because that person needed more of it. They were sick or something like that, right? And so your distribution is not strictly equal, but you think nonetheless it's just, right? That's one counterexample to a claim like this, or a potential counterexample, is you find one of these, an instance of justice, without this. Or the reverse. You find something that's strictly equal, but that's not just. Okay, so that's what a counterexample is. I just want to make one more point before we're done. Philosophers will often give counterexamples that are what I'll call fantastic. I don't mean that they're fantastic in that they're like really good or anything like that. No. I mean that they're fantastic in the sense that they are like a fantasy. They're made up, they're fictional. I could have written the word fictional here instead. Philosophers will often give these fictional or even sometimes impossible examples. And sometimes it seems weird that a scenario that's impossible, just mentioning an impossible scenario, or a scenario that is in some sense impossible, could somehow disprove a claim. But it can. That is how it works, and let me explain why. Go back to our assessment of this claim about grandmothers, this generalization about grandmothers. Let's say we couldn't come up with an example like Whoopi Goldberg, a real live example of a live human being, a real person who existed or still exists. We could still disprove this claim with a fictional scenario, even an impossible one. The example I'm about to give is a little weird. Try to put the weirdness aside. This is the only one that I could think of that fits with the case we're talking about. Suppose that you had a baby girl who gave birth to another baby girl while they're babies. And then the daughter baby girl had a baby. Okay, the first baby would exhibit grandmotherhood. That first baby would be a grandmother. That's an example of a grandmother. But this baby does not have gray hair and does not give out hard candy because it's a baby. If this was the only example we could come up with, an admittedly weird example, it would still work. Even though it's not possible, it's like biologically impossible, right? It violates the laws of biology or whatever. And so therefore, it's biologically impossible because babies can't have babies, according to the biological facts. But even though it's biologically impossible, that scenario, that example, it nonetheless shows that grandmotherhood does not consist in having gray hair and giving out hard candy. That's just a stereotype about grandmothers. That's not grandmotherhood itself. Grandmotherhood itself is just being the mother of a parent. Why does this fictional, even impossible scenario prove that this claim is false? Well, it succeeds in proving this general claim false because this general claim is about a concept. It's about the notion of grandmotherhood. We're not running scientific experiments on grandmothers, or we're not taking polls to discover what grandmothers are like or what they think or something like that. Those would be empirical inquiries. But we're looking at the concept. A concept, as I'm using the term and as philosophers typically use the term, is a shared idea, an idea that multiple people have. Grandmother is a concept. It's an idea that I have and that you have, and that lots of other people, even ones who don't have the English word grandmother, they also have the concept of grandmotherhood in their minds. We're trying to investigate the concept. Because we're trying to investigate the concept of being a grandmother, it doesn't matter if the counterexamples that we consider violate the laws of biology. That's fine, as long as they don't deviate from the concept, and they don't, right? Our concept of a grandmother can be applied to a baby who has a baby who has a baby. It just does work. You know whether or not that first baby is a grandmother, and she is. The point is, our concept, our shared idea of a grandmother, and indeed our shared idea of knowledge and our shared idea of justice, these things can be applied in fictional scenarios, and they can be applied in impossible scenarios. And for that reason, fictional, fantastic, impossible counterexamples can, in some cases, at least when we're dealing with a conceptual claim, they can still work. Okay, now you know what a counterexample is. This is like one of the most powerful and commonly used tools in philosophy.